Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me for this presentation. This is a presentation by the Light of Zion. Our website is https://www.thelightofzion.com. Yes, there we bring out the truth about God's Word so that all can benefit. So today I'm bringing to you another interesting discussion, and this one is titled Salvaging the Lost Sheep of the House of Israel. Salvaging the Lost Sheep of the House of Israel. In the last presentation that we made, it was titled Researching Out to Find Out Who the Lost Sheep of the House of Israel are. If you have not listened to that presentation, just check our website on our YouTube site, or you can check our Hebrew Canada TV site, and you will listen to that to help you to identify who the lost sheep of the house of Israel is. So let's progress on how the lost sheep of the house of Israel will be salvaged. All the sheep of the house of Israel was scattered and lost because of our error. In the book of Isaiah chapter 46 verse 8 to 10, there it is written, our God said that we should remember this and take courage. He said, take it to heart, you transgressors. He said, remember the former things of long ago, that I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is no one like me. He said, from beginning I foretell the outcome, and from long ago the things that have not yet been done. And I say, my decision will stand, and I will do whatever I please. Yes, a God called us transgressors. We are the ones that transgress against his commandments and against the covenant that he gave to our ancestors to keep. So all Israel have sinned, and all Israel are transgressors of God's commandment. But he said we should remember this, that there is no one like him, that he foretell these events from the beginning, that these things must happen, that these things will come to pass, because Yahuwah is a God that tells the future events from beginning. So he has foretold these things that will unfold, or the things that we are seeing today unfolding. He has foretold all these things that it will take place at the appointed time. Yes, the sheep of the house of Israel was lost, not because of our God's fault, but because of the error on our part and on the part of our ancestors. That's how the sheep of the house of Israel came to be lost. So it is because of our error that the sheep of Israel became lost. In the book of Amos chapter 3 verse 7, there it is written, for the sovereign Lord Yahuwah will not do a thing unless he has revealed his confidential matter to his servants the prophets of Israel. Yes, Yahuwah our God reveals and is revealing the things that he is doing with the lost sheep of the house of Israel, the sheep belonging to his pasture. He has never done anything without first revealing these things to his prophets of Israel. In the book of Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 26 and 27, there it is written regarding the sheep of the house of Israel, Yahuwah has revealed the things that will happen to the sheep of the house of Israel when Israel leave Yahuwah to go and serve other gods. It is written there that outside a sword will bereave them, inside there is terror for both young men and virgin, infant together with gray-haired men. I would have said, I will scatter them, I will make the memory of them cease from among men, if not for my dread of the enemy's reaction, because the adversaries might misconstrue it. They might say, our power has triumphed. It was not Yahuwah who did all this. So Yahuwah said that he would have scattered Israel, his sheep of the house of Israel, and abandoned them in the mountains and in the nations where they have gone, and make the memory of them to cease from among men. But if not for what the enemies of Israel will say, they will misconstrue it. They will think that they have done all this by their own power, not knowing that Yahuwah has foretold that these events must take place at the appointed time concerning the sheep of the house of Israel. So, the enemy's boldness. Remember the boldness of the enemy that Yahuwah was talking about. In the book of Ezekiel chapter 35 verse 10, there is written concerning the enemy, he said, because you say, these two nations and two lands will become mine, and we will take possession of both, even though Yahuwah himself was there. So the enemies of the sheep of the house of Israel has boasted that they will take over the land belonging to Israel, the two nations, because Israel was divided and became two nations, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. So the enemy has boasted that they will take over the two lands belonging to the people of Israel. They said even if Yahuwah is there, that they will take over the land. In the book of John chapter 10 verse 10, there Yahushua the Messiah said, the thief does not come unless it is to steal, kill, and destroy. Yes, Yahushua foretold or revealed that the enemies of the sheep of Israel will come, and they will steal, and they will kill, and they will try to destroy the sheep of the house of Israel, so that they can take over their inheritance forever. Yahushua, the Savior for the sheep of the house of Israel, has revealed these things. And yes, the enemies of the sheep of the house of Israel came, and they stole, and they killed, and they destroyed the sheep of the house of Israel away from their pasture ground. In the year 70 AD, the enemy of the sheep of Israel, the Romans, came. They stole the land of Israel. They killed many sheep of the house of Israel, and they destroyed their homeland inheritance. They also scattered many as slaves among the nations, as the Messiah foretold in the book of Luke chapter 21 verse 20 to 24. Yes, the enemies of Israel, they are bold in what they want to do with the sheep of Israel. Just keep in mind, remember this. But you should know that our God has foretold all these things before, from beginning. So what is Yahuwah's decision regarding his sheep of the house of Israel? What is his decision regarding his sheep, the lost sheep of the house of Israel? Well, join me as I read the book of Isaiah chapter 65 verse 8 to 11. And there is written, "This is what Yahuwah says, just as when a new wine is found in a cluster of grapes, and someone says, 'Do not destroy it, for there is some good in it.' He says, so I will do for the sake of my servants. I will not destroy them all. I will bring out of Jacob an offspring, and out of Judah the one to inherit my mountains. Say, my chosen ones will take possession of it, and my servant will reside there. Sharon will become a pasture for sheep, and the valley of Anchor a resting place for cattle, for my people who search for me. But you are not among those forsaking me, forsaking Yahuwah, those forgetting my holy mountain, those setting a table for the God of good luck, and those filling up cup of mixed wine for the God of destiny." So Yahuwah said that this is what he's going to do regarding his lost sheep of the house of Israel. Remember, Yahuwah tells the future from beginning. So through the prophets, he has revealed the things that he is doing regarding about his sheep, his lost sheep. So he said he's going to do what? Bring out of Jacob an offspring, and out of Judah. Remember, Israel divided into two nations, Judah and Israel. So he's going to bring out of these two nations his people that will take, his chosen ones that will take possession of his holy mountain. He said these ones will take possession of the land of Israel. And these ones that will take over possession of the land of Israel are not part of those forsaking his holy mountain, those who have forgotten about their origin, those who have chosen to go and serve other gods, those who have chosen to serve the God of good luck and the God of destiny. These are not the ones that will return and inherit his holy mountain, but it's only the chosen ones, the ones that our God has chosen, the ones that he will choose from among his lost sheep. They are the ones that will return and take possession of his holy mountain. So the sheep of the house of Israel that will return to the promised land are not the ones that has forgotten about their true origin, the holy mountain of Israel. They are not the ones who now have chosen to serve other gods or the God of the nations where they were scattered, the gods of good luck and the gods of destiny. So that is what Yahuwah said he's going to do for his lordship of the house of Israel. He's going to do what? Search them out, and he's going to choose from among them those who are searching for him. He will choose from among them those who will return to inherit his holy mountain. So Yahushua will search out God's sheep. Yahushua will search out God's sheep, and he will gather them to their pen or to their home. In the book of Ezekiel, chapter 34, verse 11 to 13, there it is written, "For this is what the sovereign Lord Yahuwah says, say, here I am, and I myself will search for my sheep, and I will care for them. I will care for my sheep like a shepherd who has found his scattered sheep and is feeding them. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered. In the day of clouds and thick gloom, I will bring them out from the peoples and collect them together from the lands, and bring them into their land and feed them on the mountains of Israel, by the streams and by all the dwelling places of the land." Yes, Yahuwah said he's going to do what? Search out his sheep and bring them back to the land of Israel. And Yahushua, the messenger or the Son of God, is the one that will search out and gather the sheep back to their homeland, the land of Israel, at the appointed time. In the book of Matthew, chapter 15, verse 24, Yahushua the Messiah said this. Yahushua answered, "I was not sent to anyone except to the lordship of the house of Israel." Yes, Yahushua was sent for the purpose of saving and gathering all the lordship of the house of Israel together at the appointed time. And he will gather together those sheep who want it, and those who are searching for their God, and who want to return to the pen or to the homeland. Yahushua will gather such sheep back to where they belong. Yahushua's direction to his true disciples about his sheep is this. In the book of Matthew chapter 10, verse 5 to 7, there is written, "These 12, Yahushua, that is the one the world called Jesus, sent out, these 12, Yahushua sent out, giving them this instruction. So do not go off into the road of the nations, and do not enter any Samaritan city, but instead go continually to the lordship of the house of Israel. As you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of the heavens has drawn near, So, yes, Yahushua gave these directions to all those who will follow him to be true disciples of our God and his Son, to help in searching out the lordship of the house of Israel at the appointed time. These are the directions of how they are to carry out these assignments and at what time they should carry out the assignment. So they are not to go off to the nations, but they are to go and locate directly the lordship of the house of Israel. For they are the ones the Messiah came to gather together. He said he was not sent for any other person or any other people, but for the lordship of the house of Israel, for the purpose of gathering them together where they belong, to their promised land. So all true disciples that will follow of our God and the disciples of Yahuwah will follow the directions that he has given concerning the regathering of his sheep at the appointed time. The message is to the lordship of the house of Israel. They are the ones that he came to gather together. Yes, Yahuwah indicated that the sheep of the house of Israel was scattered and will continue to be scattered until the appointed time to gather them together back to their promised land. Yes, Yahuwah is aware of that the sheep of Israel was scattered and will continue to be scattered until the appointed time to gather together but the sheep of the house of Israel back to the promised land. Yahuwah's desire is to gather the lordship of the house of Israel. In the book of Matthew, chapter 23, verse 37 to 39, there Yahuwah said this. He said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the killer of the prophets and stoners of those sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you did not want it. Look, your house is abandoned to you. For I say to you, you will by no means see me from now until you say, Blessed is the one who comes in the name of Yahuwah. Yes, Yahuwah has been wanting to gather all the sheep of the house of Israel together to their homeland, where they belong. But because of the error of the sheep of the house of Israel, they were abandoned to serve the punishment imposed by Yahuwah for their errors. So, the lordship of the house of Israel will be salvaged after they finish their imposed punishment, or when their imposed punishment comes to an end. In the book of Luke, chapter 21, verse 20 to 24, there is written, Yahuwah said, However, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by encamped armies, then know that the desolating of her has drawn near. Then let those in Judea begin fleeing to the mountains. Let those in the midst of her leave, and let those in the countryside not enter into her, because these are the days of meting out justice, in order that all the things written may be fulfilled. Woe to the pregnant women and those nursing a baby in those days, for there will be great distress on the land and wrath against these people, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled on by the nations until the appointed times of the nations are fulfilled. So Yahuwah made it clear that the sheep of the house of Israel will be what? led into captivity. They will be trampled, their land will be trampled, and there will be great distress upon the land, and there will be wrath against all the sheep of the house of Israel. Jerusalem will be trampled, and the sheep of the house of Israel will be led captives into all the nations. Yes, that is, the sheep of the house of Israel will be led as slaves away into all the nations until the appointed times of the nations are fulfilled. So all the sheep of the house of Israel was finally scattered and removed far away from the promised land in the year AD 70 by the Romans. So remember what all the enemies of the sheep of the house of Israel said. They said that they want to take over the land where God dwells by force. Even if Yahuwah is there, that they will take over the land of Israel by force. So a good question to ask is this: did the enemies of the sheep of Israel succeed with their plan? Well, in the book of Amos chapter 3 verse 6, there it is written, "If a horn is blown in a city, do the people not tremble? If a calamity occurs in the city, is it not Yahuwah who has acted?" Yes, Yahuwah the God of Israel allowed for the enemies of the sheep of the house of Israel to come against his land and inflict punishment on all the sheep of the house of Israel. And this is because of the error of all the sheep of Israel. So he brought the enemies against his sheep. He allowed for their plan to succeed. So he allowed his sheep to be taken captives and scattered as slaves among the nations. Yahuwah allowed their plans to succeed because if a horn is blown in a city, the people should tremble. A calamity does not occur in a city if it's not Yahuwah who has acted. So Yahuwah has acted and has carried out the punishment that he told the people of Israel that he's going to bring upon them when they leave him to go and serve other gods, when they start breaking away from his covenant. So in the book of Amos chapter 3 verse 7 and 8 is written, "For the sovereign Lord Yahuwah will not do a thing unless he has revealed his confidential matters to his servants, the prophets. The lion has roared. Who will not be afraid? The sovereign Lord Yahuwah has spoken. Who will not prophesy?" So Yahuwah foretold and has revealed that he will bring these enemies against Israel when they leave him. And who will not be afraid? Because Yahuwah will carry out whatever he said he will carry out. So yes, the enemy's plans succeeded because Yahuwah allowed it. He is the one that brought the enemies against his sheep of the house of Israel. However, Yahuwah frustrates the plans of his enemies. In the book of Psalms chapter 33 verse 10 and 11, there it is written, "Yahuwah has frustrated the schemes of the nations. He has thwarted the plans of the people. But the decisions of Yahuwah will stand forever. The thoughts of his heart are from generation to generation. Yes, he frustrates the plans of the nations to make the name of Israel be remembered no more. He will thwart the plans of the peoples to take over the land of Israel, the land inheritance for Israel forever. The land where God will dwell with his sheep of the Israel forever. Yahuwah frustrates their plans to turn the sheep of the house of Israel white. Yes, he frustrates their plan to turn the sheep of the house of Israel white. For they have said to the true sheep of house of Israel that they are not the people, and they have replaced them with the fake people. For Yahuwah frustrates the plans of the nations against his sheep. So what will Yahuwah do regarding his sheep of the house of Israel? Well, he will salvage his sheep of the house of Israel. In the book of Ezekiel chapter 34 verse 11 to 13, there it is written, "For this is what the sovereign Lord Yahuwah says. Here I myself will search for my sheep, and I will care for them. I will care for my sheep like a shepherd who has found his scattered sheep and is feeding them. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered in the days of cloud and thick gloom. I will bring them out from the peoples and collect them together from the lands and bring them into their land and feed them on the mountains of Israel, by the streams and by all the dwelling places of the land." Yes, Yahuwah said he will search out his sheep and will gather them when their imposed 2,000 years punishment end. He will gather them back, he will search them out, and he will gather them back to the land of Israel. That is what Yahuwah will do. He said he will salvage his sheep at the appointed time. In the book of Amos, chapter 9, verse 11 to 12, there is written, In that day I will raise up the boat of David that is fallen. I will repair the breaches, and I will restore its ruins. I will rebuild it as in the days of long ago, so that they may take possession of what is remaining of Edom and all the nations on whom my name has been called, declares Yahuwah, who is doing all these things. So Yahuwah said he's going to do what? At the appointed time, after the punishment of Israel, 2,000 years of punishment on Israel has come to an end. Yahuwah said that he's going to do what? Search his sheep, and he will gather them back in the day when he's going to raise up the boat of David that has fallen, which is the house of Israel. He said he's going to repair the breaches and restore its ruins, so that the remaining ones of the sheep of the house of Israel will take possession of the remaining ones or sheep of Edom and all the other nations. So the regathered sheep of Israel will take possession of all the other sheep of the nations. Yes, Yahuwah will search out his sheep and will gather them together and they will take possession of the remaining ones of the nations. In the book of Zechariah chapter 8 verse 20 to 23, there is written, "This is what Yahuwah of armies says. It will yet come to pass that peoples and the inhabitants of many cities will come, and the inhabitants of one city will go to those of another and say, Let us earnestly go to beg for the favor of Yahuwah and to seek Yahuwah of armies. I am also going, and many peoples and mighty nations will come to seek Yahuwah of armies in Jerusalem and to beg for the favor of Yahuwah. This is what Yahuwah of armies says. In those days, 10 men out of all the languages of the nations will take hold, yes, they will take firm hold of the robe of a Jew, saying, We will go with you, for we have heard that God is with you people. Yes, after God gathers back his people, his lost sheep, 10 out of every language of the nations will follow an Israelite, a person who is what? A Jew, an Israelite, because they would have seen that and heard that God is with his people by the things that Yahuwah will do in order to gather back his sheep to where they belong. So he said that this is coming, it will yet come to pass. It will yet come to pass that peoples of the other nations will, the remaining ones, will beg and follow the people of Israel to go and seek and beg for the favor of Yahuwah, the God of Israel. This will yet come to pass. But after Yahuwah has gathered back his sheep of the house of Israel, yes, the remaining sheep of the nations will take hold of the robe of the sheep of the house of Israel. For there we know that God is with us. A good question is this: when will Yahuwah salvage his lost sheep of the house of Israel? When will Yahuwah salvage his lost sheep of the house of Israel? Well, the book of Matthew 24 verse 29 to 31 is written, Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will be themselves in grief. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels, and a great trumpet sound, and they will gather his chosen ones together from the four winds, from one extremity of the heavens to the other extremities of the heaven. Yes, Yahuwah will search out his sheep and will gather them immediately after the 2,000 years imposed punishment on them ends. That is when Yahuwah will gather or salvage his lost sheep of the house of Israel. He will gather them back to the promised land. Then the chosen ones of the sheep of the house of Israel will say, Blessed is the one coming in Yahuwah's name to save and to gather all the sheep of the house of Israel together and to rule over them. Yes, remember the Messiah said, I have wanted to gather you together, but you did not want it. But he said, you will not see me the next time you see me is when you say, Blessed is he that is coming in the name of Yahuwah to gather to save and to gather the lordship of the house of Israel together. So yes, after the punishment on the lordship of the house of Israel, after their punishment ends, is when Yahuwah will use his son Yahushua to gather the lordship, the remaining ones of the chosen ones of the lordship of the house of Israel together. So, in conclusion, we have seen that salvaging or salvation is coming for the lordship of the house of Israel at the end of our punishment time. In the book of Isaiah, it is written, Isaiah chapter 10, verse 21 to 23, it is written, only a remnant will return, the remnant of Jacob, to the mighty God. For though your people, O Israel, are as the grain of the sand of the sea, only a remnant of them will return, and extermination has been decided on, and justice will engulf them. Yes, the extermination decided on by the sovereign Lord Yahuwah of armies will be carried out in the entire land. So, not every lordship of the house of Israel will return back to the promised land. Not every lordship of the house of Israel will be salvaged. Even though Israel, the lordship of Israel, multiply among the nations as the grain of the sand of the sea, only a few chosen ones, a remnant, will return to the mighty God. The rest of the lordship of the house of Israel will be exterminated among the nations where they were scattered. That is Yahuwah's judgment, and that is Yahuwah's decisions. So an extermination has been decided on by the sovereign Lord. Those who refuse to seek for their God, and those who refuse to search for him in order for them to return to the sovereign Lord Yahuwah, will be exterminated among the nations where they have been scattered. But only a few chosen remnant of the sheep of the house of Israel will return back to the mighty God, those who search for their God, not those who refuse to leave the gods of the nations alone, the gods of good luck, the god of destiny, the gods of wood and stone. Only those who seek to return to their God, who search for their God, the ones chosen by Yahuwah, the God of Israel, they are the ones that will return back to the promised land at the end of the punishment time on the sheep of the house of Israel. So, I hope this is enlightening to you. I hope it helps bring out to your understanding what your God is doing and what the true God is doing with his lordship of the house of Israel. So share this message, like it, and share it with others. Help others to take advantage of the time that we're living in. For many sheep of the house of Israel are still lost and don't know who they are as a people. But you that is aware, you that is awakened, should continue to seek Yahuwah your God, and he has chosen until he has chosen you to be one of the ones that will return back to the mighty God at the end of our punishment time. So until I come to you with another interesting message, remain blessed, and may you continue to seek to return back to the promised land. Again, thank you.